The moment my sister Chloe called me the dumbest loser ever in front of our entire family, a switch flipped. Because she had no idea that I was the one paying for the very lifestyle she was bragging about. The air in the room went completely still, a sudden, heavy silence replacing the easy chatter. My mother's face paled, my father stared at his plate, and everyone else suddenly found their dessert incredibly fascinating. Growing up as the older daughter, I learned early that love in our family came with conditions. My parents never explicitly said they preferred Chloe, but their actions spoke volumes. Every little achievement Chloe made was met with thunderous applause and celebration dinners. My accomplishments? A brief nod, then the conversation instantly swung back to her. This pattern started young. Chloe got piano lessons because she showed interest for 3 days, but my repeated requests for art classes were always dismissed as impractical. Her bedroom was redecorated twice in high school to match her evolving tastes. I slept in the same pale yellow room with faded curtains from elementary school until I finally moved out. My birthday parties were quiet family affairs with store-bought cake, while Chloe's involved elaborate themes and guest lists that stretched into the dozens. My parents always justified it with the same line: Chloe had potential that needed nurturing. She was going places, destined for greatness, and sacrifices had to be made for her success. The implication was crystal clear, even if they never said it directly. I was the sturdy, dependable one who would manage just fine without extra attention or resources. This dynamic became painfully clear during college applications. Chloe only applied to prestigious universities with tuition rates that made my eyes water. My parents cheered her on, assuring her that finances would somehow work out. My turn, for years earlier, had involved being steered towards community college and state schools with affordable price tags. My grades were actually higher than Chloe's would be, but apparently, my potential wasn't worth the investment. I ended up at a decent state university on a partial scholarship, covering the rest with student loans and part-time work. The education was solid, but I graduated with debt that would take years to repay. Chloe, meanwhile, got into a private university with an annual tuition bill exceeding $40,000. My parents had saved practically nothing for either of us, having spent decades living paycheck to paycheck while maintaining appearances. The summer before Chloe's freshman year, my parents sat me down for what they called the family discussion. I'd been working full-time as a marketing coordinator for 2 years by then. My mother's hands twisted nervously in her lap, and my father cleared his throat repeatedly. They needed my help, he finally admitted. Chloe's financial aid only covered a fraction of her costs, and they couldn't secure loans for the full amount without a cosigner who had better credit and a steady income. They wanted me to co-sign for Chloe's student loans. $70,000 worth of debt over 4 years, possibly more if she went to grad school. My father explained that my established work history and decent credit score made me the logical choice. My mother added that this was my chance to really help my sister achieve her dreams, to be part of something bigger than myself. The request left me speechless. Taking on that responsibility meant risking my financial stability for years. If Chloe defaulted, my credit would be destroyed. If she struggled to find work, I'd be making payments on 2 educations instead of 1. But saying no felt impossible. My parents made it clear that refusing would mean sabotaging Chloe's future, crushing her dreams because of my selfishness. They reminded me of everything Chloe could become, the doors that would open, the success that was waiting. Family helps family, my mother said. This is what sisters do for each other. I signed the paperwork. The decision haunted me immediately, but backing out felt worse than moving forward. Chloe headed off to university that fall with a new laptop, a wardrobe full of clothes purchased specifically for her fresh start, and the kind of optimistic excitement that comes from having every obstacle cleared from your path. Her freshman year went smoothly, according to my parents' updates. Chloe was thriving socially, joining clubs, and making friends from the kind of wealthy families we'd only seen in movies. She called home regularly with stories about campus life, requested money for textbooks and supplies, and assured everyone her classes were challenging but manageable. Sophomore year brought a shift. Chloe moved into an off-campus apartment with 3 roommates, a decision my parents supported despite the additional expense. It was in a trendy neighborhood near campus, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and monthly rent that exceeded my mortgage payment. Chloe explained that living on campus had been too restrictive, too limiting for someone who needed space to grow and explore independence. The rent fell partially on my parents, but they were already stretched thin. Chloe called me directly one evening, her voice bright and carefree. The apartment was perfect, she gushed, exactly the kind of place she'd always imagined. But her portion of the rent was $900 monthly, and she needed help covering it while she focused on her studies. She promised it would be temporary. Once she finished her degree and launched her career, she'd pay me back with interest. She painted vivid pictures of her future success, the high-paying job she'd certainly land, the gratitude she'd show for my support during these formative years. Saying no would mean forcing her back into dorm life, stunting her growth, limiting her potential. I agreed to cover her rent. It meant taking on a second job, bartending 4 nights weekly at a downtown restaurant where the tips were decent and the hours brutal. My days became an exhausting cycle of work, sleep, and more work. The marketing agency occupied my mornings and afternoons, while evenings disappeared into the blur of mixing drinks and forcing smiles for customers who saw me as part of the scenery. Social life became a memory. Friends stopped inviting me out after I declined repeatedly, too exhausted or too broke. Dating was impossible. Hobbies and interests faded, replaced by the singular focus of earning enough money to keep all the financial plates spinning. Working 40 hours at the marketing agency plus another 24 bartending meant 70-hour weeks became my new normal. My body protested constantly, but bills didn't care about exhaustion. Chloe's updates continued painting her life in glowing terms. She posted photos on social media showing brunches with friends, weekend trips to nearby cities, concerts, and events that filled her calendar. Her apartment looked beautiful in the pictures she shared, decorated with furniture and accessories that certainly weren't thrift store finds. She wore clothes from brands I recognized but couldn't afford. Carrying bags that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Questions about where the money came from went unasked. I told myself her roommates must come from wealthy families, or maybe she had a part-time job she hadn't mentioned. Perhaps my parents were stretching their budget further than I knew. Junior year arrived with new developments. Chloe's major shifted from business to communications, a change that extended her graduation timeline and added extra semesters to the financial burden. She explained she'd discovered her true passion, that communications aligned better with her skills and interests. The switch meant retaking certain requirements and adding specialized courses. Nobody asked if this was fiscally responsible. My parents praised her for having the courage to follow her dreams rather than settling for something practical. Chloe herself seemed unconcerned, confident that everything would work out fine. The private student loan payments started coming due during her senior year. We'd borrowed from a lender that required payments to begin while she was still in school. Federal loans had a grace period, but these were different. Suddenly, I was responsible for monthly payments that consumed a significant chunk of my income. Combined with my own student loans, Chloe's rent, and basic living expenses, I was barely breaking even despite working nearly 70 hours weekly across both jobs. My health started deteriorating. Exhaustion became my default state, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that sleep barely touched. Weight fell off my frame because cooking proper meals required energy I didn't have. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. A persistent cough developed that I ignored because taking time off work meant falling behind on bills. My doctor warned me during a rare visit that I was headed for serious health problems if I didn't make changes soon. But making changes meant confronting the entire dynamic that had defined my adult life. It meant telling Chloe no and facing my parents' disappointment. It meant accepting that I had enabled this situation through my inability to set boundaries. The thought of that felt more daunting than simply continuing the unsustainable routine. My social isolation deepened into something that felt permanent. Former friends had stopped reaching out entirely after years of declined invitations. Dating apps on my phone went unopened because the thought of trying to explain my life to a potential partner seemed impossible. How do you tell someone you're 28, educated, employed full-time, and still living in poverty because you're funding your younger sister's comfortable lifestyle? The breaking point should have come much sooner. Looking back, I can identify dozens of moments where a reasonable person would have stopped the bleeding and walked away. But emotional manipulation is insidious precisely because it makes unreasonable situations feel normal. My parents had been conditioning me since childhood to put Chloe first, and that programming ran deep. Chloe's social media presence showcased a completely different reality. She posted pictures from trendy restaurants, concerts, weekend trips to neighboring states. Her apartment looked like something from an interior design magazine. She wore professional outfits that must have cost hundreds of dollars per piece. The dissonance between her lifestyle and her supposed financial struggles should have raised red flags. But I was too tired to examine things critically, too ground down by constant work to question how she afforded luxuries while claiming she needed my help with basic rent. My parents certainly weren't asking questions, too busy basking in pride over Chloe's successful launch into adulthood. Then came that family dinner, on a Saturday evening in late November, nearly 18 months after Chloe's graduation. My mother had organized the gathering for my father's birthday, inviting both daughters, aunts, uncles, and cousins, including my cousin Emily. I'd requested the evening off from bartending weeks in advance, knowing my mother would be hurt if I missed it. Chloe arrived late, sweeping in with dramatic flair and designer shopping bags from an afternoon spent browsing downtown boutiques. She wore a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent, paired with boots I recognized from a luxury brand's recent advertising campaign. Her hair looked freshly styled, her manicure perfect, her whole appearance polished in a way that required both money and time. Dinner conversation flowed around typical family topics. My aunt asked about work, and I described a recent successful campaign. My father's brother talked about renovating his kitchen. My mother's sister shared updates about her daughter's pregnancy. Normal, pleasant exchanges. Chloe dominated much of the attention, as usual. She talked enthusiastically about her job, describing office dynamics and projects. My parents hung on every word, praising her insights. She casually mentioned she was being considered for a promotion, though she'd been with the company for less than 2 years. Dessert was being served when my uncle asked me about my living situation. He knew I'd been in my studio apartment for years and wondered if I'd considered moving somewhere nicer. Before I could answer, Chloe laughed sharply from across the table. The sound cut through the ambient conversation, drawing everyone's attention. Chloe's expression held amusement mixed with something that looked like contempt. She took a sip of wine before speaking, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. She said I would probably never move somewhere better because I lacked ambition and drive. According to her, I was content settling for mediocrity instead of pushing myself towards success. She had always been the motivated one, she continued, the daughter who actually made something of herself instead of just coasting along. My parents shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Other family members found their dessert plates suddenly fascinating. Chloe kept talking, her words flowing more freely. She said some people were simply destined for greater things while others were meant to stay in the background, and clearly I had accepted my role as the latter. Then came the sentence that made my vision blur with rage. Chloe looked directly at me, her smile condescending and cruel, and called me the dumbest loser ever. She said it casually, as if commenting on the weather, as if those words were simply objective truth rather than a vicious insult. She added that at least I was consistent, having never shown much potential for anything beyond basic competence. The table had gone completely silent. My mother's face had drained of color while my father stared at his plate. My aunt looked horrified, and my uncle's jaw had dropped open. Chloe seemed oblivious to the impact of her words, taking another bite of cake as if nothing significant had occurred. My cousin Emily, who had been quiet most of the evening, spoke up suddenly. She asked Chloe how exactly she could afford her lifestyle on an entry-level marketing salary. The question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Chloe's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by the directness. She stammered something about being good with money and living frugally. Emily pressed further, mentioning she'd seen Chloe's apartment in photos and knew the neighborhood. That area definitely wasn't cheap, she noted. Chloe's face flushed as she insisted she had roommates helping split costs, which was technically true, but left out the crucial detail that I was paying the largest portion of her share. My uncle jumped in then, his voice carrying an edge I rarely heard from him. He said he had always wondered how Chloe managed to live so well while supposedly struggling financially. He mentioned seeing her at an expensive steakhouse downtown several months earlier, somewhere he only went for special occasions because of the cost. Chloe had been with friends, laughing and ordering appetizers and cocktails like money was no concern. The spotlight shifting to Chloe's finances made me realize something important. Other family members had noticed the inconsistencies, the gap between her claims of financial struggle and her obvious spending. They had simply never said anything, perhaps assuming my parents were providing support or that Chloe had resources they didn't know about. My mother tried to redirect the conversation, suggesting we should focus on enjoying the evening rather than discussing finances. But my aunt wasn't ready to let it drop. She looked directly at me and asked how I was really doing, noting that I looked exhausted and had lost weight since she last saw me. The genuine concern in her voice almost broke through my carefully maintained composure. Something crystallized in that moment. The years of sacrifice, the endless exhaustion, the financial strain that had consumed my 20s suddenly coalesced into a single point of absolute clarity. I had destroyed my health, sabotaged my career, and eliminated any semblance of personal life to fund Chloe's education and lifestyle, and she viewed me with contempt, saw me as a loser, too stupid to achieve anything worthwhile. I stood up from the table. My voice came out steady despite the rage burning through my chest. I thanked my father for hosting dinner and wished him a happy birthday. Then, I walked out without another word, ignoring Chloe's confused expression and my parents' attempts to call me back. The drive home passed in a blur. Once inside my apartment, I pulled out my laptop and began documenting everything. Bank statements showing years of rent payments to Chloe's various landlords. Records of the loan co-signing and subsequent payments I had been making. Text messages and emails where Chloe had promised repayment that never materialized. Social media posts showing her expensive lifestyle juxtaposed with the dates she claimed to be struggling financially. Compiling the evidence took most of the night. I created a spreadsheet breaking down every payment by month and year, categorizing expenses into tuition support, rent, utilities, groceries, and miscellaneous assistance. Seeing the numbers laid out systematically made the scope of exploitation impossible to deny. The rent payments alone totaled over $48,000. Chloe had lived in the off-campus apartment for 3 years during college at $900 monthly, which I covered completely. That was $32,400. Then she had been in her post-graduation apartment for 18 months at $1,300 monthly, adding another $23,400. Combined, those rent payments had consumed $55,800 of my income. But rent was only part of the story. I had sent money for textbooks every semester, amounts ranging from $300 to $600 depending on her course load. Over 5 years of college, that totaled approximately $2,500. Her car insurance had been another recurring expense when she claimed she couldn't afford it, roughly $80 monthly for 2 years, adding $1,600 more. Emergency expenses that always seemed to arise before weekend trips or shopping excursions had drained another several thousand over the years. Then there were the utilities and groceries during her college years, the times I had covered her portion when roommates were asking for payment. Monthly contributions of $100 here, $200 there, adding up to thousands more across those 3 years of off-campus living. The miscellaneous support totaled roughly $12,000 when I added everything together. Combined with the rent payments, I had given Chloe approximately $68,000 in direct financial support over the course of 6.5 years since she started college. Then there were the student loans, $70,000 in debt attached to my name with payments I had been making faithfully to protect my credit score. Chloe was supposed to be contributing to those payments after graduation, but her contributions had been sporadic at best and non-existent for the past several months. I pulled up her social media profiles and started taking screenshots. Chloe's Instagram showed a curated life of luxury and leisure. Photos from a ski trip 3 months earlier, tagged at a resort where lift tickets alone cost over $100 per day. Pictures from a concert 2 weeks ago where the tickets must have been at least $200 each based on the venue and artist. A weekend in wine country last month staying at a bed and breakfast that I looked up online and found charged $300 per night. Her clothing and accessories told their own story. I recognized brands from window shopping during my rare free moments, items that cost more than my entire monthly clothing budget combined. A handbag in one photo retailed for $1,200. The sunglasses she wore in multiple pictures were from a designer brand with prices starting at $400. Even her casual athleisure wear came from expensive labels. The evidence painted an ugly picture. Over 6.5 years, I had given Chloe approximately $68,000 in direct support. That figure didn't include the loans I had co-signed, which represented another $70,000 in debt attached to my name. The total financial burden I had taken on for Chloe's benefit exceeded $138,000. I had sacrificed enough money to make a substantial down payment on a house, fund my own graduate education, or invest for retirement. Monday morning, I called Chloe. She answered cheerfully, apparently unbothered by her behavior at the dinner. I told her calmly that I would no longer be paying her rent or covering any other expenses, effective immediately. She was financially on her own. If she couldn't afford her apartment on her salary, she needed to move somewhere cheaper or find additional income. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Chloe laughed nervously, asking if I was joking. When I confirmed I was completely serious, her tone shifted to incredulous. She couldn't afford her apartment without my help, she protested. I couldn't just abandon her like this without warning. What was she supposed to do? I suggested she figure it out the way most adults did, by living within her means and adjusting her lifestyle to match her income. Then I ended the call before she could argue further. Within an hour, my phone was flooded with messages from Chloe, my parents, and even some extended family members who had apparently been recruited to change my mind. The messages ranged from pleading to angry. Chloe claimed I was ruining her life over a simple joke. My mother insisted I was overreacting to a thoughtless comment made after too much wine. My father said I was being selfish and vindictive, punishing Chloe for one mistake. Various relatives chimed in with opinions about family loyalty and forgiveness. I responded to none of them. Instead, I drafted a detailed email explaining the full scope of my financial support over the past 6.5 years. I included specific figures, dates, and documentation. I described working 2 jobs for years while Chloe lived comfortably beyond her means. I outlined the sacrifices I had made to my health, career, and personal life. And I quoted exactly what Chloe had called me at the family dinner. The email went to my parents, Chloe, and every family member who had attended the birthday dinner. I made it clear that I was done being treated as an ATM machine by someone who viewed me with contempt. If Chloe wanted to maintain her lifestyle, she would need to fund it herself. My financial support had officially ended. The fallout was immediate and explosive. My phone rang constantly for days, which I simply stopped answering. Chloe left increasingly frantic voicemails as she apparently realized I was serious. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, begging me to reconsider and not let pride destroy family relationships. My father sent long text messages about disappointment and family obligations. The voicemails from Chloe progressed through predictable stages. First came confusion, asking if I was upset and requesting I call her back. Then came irritation, accusing me of being dramatic and immature over a simple joke. Anger followed, with Chloe demanding to know how I could abandon her like this when she depended on me. Finally came desperation, with her crying and saying she didn't know what she was going to do. My mother's visit was particularly difficult. She stood in my doorway with tears streaming down her face, insisting that I was tearing the family apart. According to her, siblings fought sometimes, but that didn't mean you stopped helping each other. She reminded me that Chloe was still young and finding her way, that everyone struggled financially in their 20s, that family was supposed to support each other through difficult times. I asked my mother point blank if she had read the email I sent. She admitted she had but claimed I was exaggerating the situation. When I showed her my bank statements and the spreadsheet documenting 6 years of payments, she went quiet. Then she said that I had never told her the full extent of what I was providing, that she assumed I was just helping occasionally with small amounts. That excuse fell apart quickly. My parents knew Chloe's rent because they had helped her apartment hunt. They knew what her lifestyle looked like because they saw the photos and heard the stories. They knew I was working 2 jobs because I had mentioned it countless times. Claiming ignorance meant admitting they had deliberately avoided asking questions they didn't want answered. My father's texts revealed his priorities clearly. He focused entirely on how this decision affected Chloe rather than acknowledging anything I had endured. His messages painted me as vindictive and cruel, punishing Chloe for one thoughtless comment instead of being the bigger person. He suggested that successful people didn't hold grudges over small slights. That maturity meant rising above petty conflicts. But support also emerged from unexpected sources. My uncle, who had asked about my living situation, sent a message saying he had always suspected something like this was happening. My aunt confessed she had found Chloe's lifestyle suspicious given her entry-level salary. Several cousins reached out privately to express admiration for my decision and share their own stories of being taken advantage of by family members. My cousin Emily, who had questioned Chloe at the dinner, called me directly. She said she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself, that she had watched this dynamic play out for years and wondered when I would reach my breaking point. Emily shared that she had once lent Chloe $300 for an emergency car repair, only to see Chloe post photos from an expensive brunch with friends 2 days later. She had never been repaid despite multiple requests. Another cousin admitted that Chloe had asked to borrow money from her as well, claiming she was short on rent. The cousin had declined because something felt off about the request, particularly since Chloe's social media showed no signs of financial hardship. She had felt guilty about refusing at the time, but now realized that instinct had been correct. Chloe's landlord contacted me after she apparently listed me as a reference and source of rental payment history. He wanted to verify that I would continue covering rent. I informed him clearly that I had never been on the lease, had no legal obligation to pay anything, and would not be providing any future payments. He should deal directly with Chloe regarding her tenancy. 3 weeks later, Chloe called from my parents' house. She had been forced to break her lease early, paying the required 2-month penalty and losing her security deposit in the process. Her voice carried a brittleness I had never heard before, stripped of the casual confidence that usually characterized her speech. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't meant what she said at dinner, that she had never intended to hurt me. The apology felt hollow, motivated by consequences rather than genuine remorse. I told her that I accepted she was sorry for the impact of her words, but that the comment itself had simply revealed what she truly thought of me. More importantly, her apology didn't address the years of taking my financial support for granted while never acknowledging the sacrifices involved. She tried arguing that she had always planned to pay me back when she got established. I asked when exactly that would have happened, given that she was 2 years into her career and still requesting money while simultaneously buying designer clothes and taking vacations. She had no answer beyond vague assurances that it would have worked out eventually. My parents attempted mediation, inviting both of us to their house for a moderated conversation. The discussion devolved quickly into accusations and defensive posturing. My mother kept insisting that family should forgive and move forward. My father suggested I was being unnecessarily harsh over money that I had given voluntarily. I corrected him immediately. The money hadn't been given voluntarily so much as extracted through emotional manipulation and implicit threats about ruining Chloe's future. Every request had come wrapped in urgency and promises of repayment. I had been repeatedly told that my support was temporary, just until Chloe got on her feet. Those assurances had proven worthless. Chloe sat silently through most of the conversation, her earlier confidence completely absent. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of her own actions. My parents kept pushing for reconciliation, for some arrangement where I would resume financial support under different terms. I made my position clear. I was done funding Chloe's lifestyle in any capacity. The loans remained in both our names and I would continue making payments to protect my credit. But beyond that legal obligation, Chloe would receive nothing further from me. If she wanted a relationship with me going forward, it would need to be built on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation. The meeting ended without resolution. My parents were disappointed. Chloe was upset. And I felt nothing but relief at having finally drawn a firm boundary. Leaving their house that evening, I experienced a sense of lightness that had been absent for years. Chloe remained living with my parents for 8 months. Her social media presence changed dramatically, the stream of expensive lifestyle photos replaced by sparse, carefully curated posts. She eventually found a studio apartment in a less desirable part of the city, the kind of place I had been living in while funding her much nicer accommodations. My parents gradually adjusted to the new reality, though my mother still made occasional comments about sisters who should support each other. My relationship with them remained strained, marked by the unspoken acknowledgement that they had enabled Chloe's behavior and my exploitation for years. The second job disappeared from my schedule within weeks of cutting off Chloe's support. Having my evenings back felt almost surreal initially, vast expanses of time that I had forgotten existed. My health slowly improved as exhaustion stopped being my constant companion. The persistent cough faded, weight returned to my frame, and the dark circles under my eyes gradually lightened. Career opportunities that had seemed impossible suddenly became accessible. With energy to invest in professional development, I pursued certifications and training that had languished on my someday list. My performance at work improved noticeably, leading to a promotion and significant raise within a year. My savings account, empty for years, began accumulating a balance. Small at first, just a few hundred, representing progress rather than substantial security. But it grew steadily month after month, building toward goals that had seemed permanently out of reach. Chloe and I maintained minimal contact, brief exchanges at unavoidable family gatherings, polite but distant. She never directly addressed the years of financial support beyond that initial hollow apology. Some relationships can't be repaired once the foundation cracks completely, and ours had fractured beyond any simple fix. Looking back, the warning signs had been obvious from childhood. The differential treatment, the constant prioritization of Chloe's wants over my needs, the message that my value lay in supporting someone deemed more important. But seeing patterns clearly requires distance, and I had been too immersed in the dynamic to recognize how toxic it had become. The hardest part wasn't cutting off financial support or weathering family pressure. It was accepting how thoroughly I had been used by someone who viewed me with contempt. Chloe's cruel comment at dinner hadn't created new feelings so much as revealed existing ones. She had always seen me as less than, someone whose purpose was facilitating her success rather than pursuing my own. Freedom from that dynamic came with unexpected grief, mourning the relationship I had imagined existed. The sister bond that had never actually been real. Accepting that my sacrifice had been taken for granted rather than appreciated. Recognizing that some people would happily drain you dry while criticizing you for not giving more. But grief eventually transformed into something closer to peace. My life belonged to me again. My resources directed toward my own goals rather than someone else's comfort. The exhaustion lifted, replaced by energy to invest in building the life I wanted. Possibilities expanded where they had previously been limited by financial and temporal constraints. Chloe's trajectory shifted noticeably without my subsidies. Her lifestyle adjusted to match her actual income, a process she clearly found uncomfortable. But that discomfort was never my responsibility to prevent, and the consequences of her own choices were finally landing where they belonged. Family dynamics would never fully recover from the exposed truth. The pretense of equal treatment had been shattered, leaving my parents to confront their role in creating the situation. Whether they truly understood their complicity remained unclear, though their discomfort suggested some level of awareness. My decision to share documentation with the family had been calculated. Letting my parents frame the situation as petty sibling rivalry or overreaction would have allowed them to pressure me indefinitely. Public accountability made that impossible, forcing everyone to acknowledge the scope of what had occurred. Some family members took my side explicitly, sharing their own observations about Chloe's privileged treatment over the years. Others remained neutral, unwilling to get involved in family drama. A few seemed to think I should have continued supporting Chloe regardless, valuing family loyalty above personal well-being. Those differing reactions helped clarify which relationships held value worth maintaining. Family connection alone didn't justify unlimited tolerance for exploitation. People who genuinely cared about my well-being supported my boundary. Those who prioritized Chloe's comfort over my health revealed their true priorities. Recovery took longer than expected. Years of stress and exhaustion couldn't be erased in weeks or even months. My body needed time to heal from the sustained damage of brutal work schedules and neglected health. My mind required space to process the emotional impact of being so thoroughly devalued by family. Therapy helped enormously, providing tools to understand and address patterns I had internalized from childhood. Learning that self-sacrifice wasn't virtuous when it stemmed from manipulation rather than genuine care. Recognizing that boundaries weren't selfish, but necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. Understanding that my worth wasn't determined by usefulness to others. The financial recovery continues still. Paying down debt accumulated from years of supporting two people's lifestyles on one person's income is a slow process. But progress happens monthly. Each payment reducing balances and moving me closer to genuine financial freedom. The loans Chloe and I co-signed will take years to eliminate, a lasting reminder of my costly mistake. But I'm building something now, constructing a life based on my own values and goals rather than someone else's expectations. My apartment might not be magazine-worthy, but it's mine, paid for with money I control completely. My career might not be prestigious, but it's developing according to my ambitions rather than being sacrificed for someone else's benefit. Chloe's assessment of me as the dumbest loser ever proved ironically prophetic. I had been incredibly stupid to allow the exploitation to continue for so long, but recognizing that stupidity and correcting course was ultimately the smartest decision I ever made. The story serves as a cautionary tale about family dynamics and financial boundaries. Helping family members isn't inherently wrong, but help should flow from genuine care rather than obligation and manipulation. Sacrifice means nothing when it's extracted through emotional coercion. And gratitude should accompany support, not contempt disguised as sibling banter. Would I make the same choices knowing how things would unfold? Absolutely not. But those choices taught essential lessons about self-worth, boundaries, and the difference between genuine family bonds and toxic relationships masquerading as love. Sometimes the most important growth comes from our worst mistakes. And this one transformed my entire understanding of what I owed others versus what I owed myself. My life now might look modest compared to Chloe's former lifestyle, but it's sustainable, healthy, and genuinely mine. That ownership matters more than any external appearance of success. I'm finally investing in my own future rather than funding someone else's present. What would you have done if you were me?